Guy McPherson here again with Neil, and we're going to talk again about deep time. And specifically, we're going to go into considerably more detail with respect to rocks and geographic periods than we've done before. So, Neil, you want to start us off right there with that first slide?
Yes, Guy, thank you. So here I've managed to find what I think is Robert Crumb's illustration. It might be another comic book artist, underground comic book artist from the 60s or 70s, and did a fun version of the classic standard geological chart with the different epochs and eras and periods. Um, and as we covered in our previous, you know, look back in deep time, where the Iceman goeth, we learned that it was the Cambrian explosion, which is right there, that gives rise to thousands of forms of sea life, including the trilobite, the famous trilobite, which many people recognize is there. And we go on up, and there's four big extinctions here um, indicated. The Permian being one of the largest. And so this is a fun chart, and we see humankind and their activities on the very top of this layer. Let's go to the next chart, which I thought I'd include. People might say, well, is all of this science of geology, is this some creation of the 60s or the 50s, or is this, science that was funded by the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt? Is it colored in any political way by 20th century American politics? And if you look at the history of the profession of geology itself, that's a whole beautiful thing. And this is from Lecomte in 1880. And I think, Guy, you'll tell me that actually this kind of chart and stratigraphy goes back probably another century or two. What do you know about the earliest forms of what you would call modern stratigraphy in geology? How old is it?
I know very little, but I'm sure it precedes this one by a long time. People have been looking at rocks for essentially as long as there have been people and trying
And
to read history into those rocks, figure out what came before us. And of course, most importantly, when did we show up?
And indeed, they were periodizing things this way even before Darwin. So it isn't even the rise of Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution that caused scientists to start categorizing um, by when they dig for modern scientists. So you could say modern science maybe begins in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. We have been digging up strata on this planet to mine and to do various other things for practical purposes as well as scientific purposes. The two are related. If your goal is to get iron ore, you need the science. You need to be very serious, and we have been very serious about getting iron ore ever since. Let's see, the Iron Age, and so a separate talk could be how far back does this go, and also how much has it changed. And it's my understanding that the basic stratigraphy here in Lecomte it's somewhat changed. The profession has come up with slightly different boundaries for most of these, but the central names are still the same. The central concept is still the same. So that's just from background. In case people think this is you know, something cooked up at Harvard or Princeton, just, wherever by liberals, it's not. All right, let's go to the next one. This, I think, is the official USGS chart, far more detailed than what we've been talking about. Professional geologists who might work in any number of professions need this and use this information to characterize what they're finding, where they're going, what they're looking for. And I'm going to say something here, Guy. Am I correct that if one just you look at these beautiful names here, for example, across the top, Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. You know, zoic means life in, I think, Greek, and paleo means old. Meso means middle, and Ceno means new. And what I take from this guy is I did take Latin in school, but how much of the first year of either geology class or conservation biology could I coast if I had just taken Latin, no other scientific background? How much of this chart would I simply be able to look at and say, oh, I know what that's talking about?
I'm reminded of this sort of thing almost every day because my partner Pauline speaks Greek fluently, and
Aha.
and she also learned French when she was in high school, when she was young enough to actually learn the language. And so
Right.
she got all the Western languages covered, basically. She got a Romance language with French, and she's got Greek. And she still speaks Greek occasionally to anybody who will speak it with her. And it covers so much, as you pointed out. If you understand the language, the predecessors to our current language, you can understand a whole bunch of this stuff that I have great trouble with, and probably you do too.
Mm-hmm. It does help. So once you know your Greek and Latin, you will make coleslaw of the standard United States Geological Survey names for all these periods. These are the scientific names; they're not just the USGS. This is 200 or 300 or 400 years of scientists digging up and naming different layers based on the critters and life forms they found. This is a, a, a long running scientific enterprise and consensus, and it is subject to change, as all science is. It's subject to finding new shit out.
Absolutely.
Now, let us go. We are going to go deep, not today as conservation biologists, at least, or biologists, or paleoclimatologists, or climatologists. We're going to go into this knowledge the way another major interested camp and party goes into it. Next slide. We're going to ask, where do fossil fuels come from? And I include this slide because this just gives in one slide some of the kinds of geologic formations that happen on a planet with land and waterways, mountains, tectonic plates, the basics of gravity on a planet of our size. And this is how things form over time. And then you have to add millions of years. So, you have glaciers washing stuff down, you have alluvial runs where soils and life forms and stuff gets deposited. You have fluvial, you have evaporating lakes and living lakes, you have tidal flats, lagoons, swamps, deltas. The deltaic would include things like mangroves and swamps. And then underwater, you can see that what's a submarine fan? It's where all the crap that washed down from as high as the glacier is deposited, but in a certain teardrop shape. And that would be deep water marine. So it isn't just the case that deep water has what's in the deep, it has a deposit of what's flowed off the continental shelf at any given time. I want people to imagine that you then take this activity, which you could find today, but think of this activity as it happened 30 million years ago. And what you're uncovering is the ancient submarine fan of a bunch of organic matter that died and washed out and was then covered by something else and then turned into a solid plate that then was uplifted by tectonic forces. It's an incredible sandwich of layers of millennia and millions and billions of years. I'm just trying to put a shape to how the planet's dynamics happen just in geologic terms.
And this simple graphic contains at least 90% of what happens on the planet.
Yeah.
This is a big deal boiled down into a relatively small chart.
We even have reefs with coral, and the life forms and things that coral reefs do around them, in them, and under them. And then when they get covered by some other layer, they behave differently, and you can find different things. And so if you have a bunch of plant matter that dies in a mangrove, if you put your arrow over the deltaic area or the lagoons, you have an extremely rich ecosystems there that are constantly living and dying, and they literally build up a layer of dead plant matter. And so that's pretty fascinating. So this is just to give people an idea of how does shit get buried and what happens to shit when it gets buried. Let's go to the next one. So we're going to talk about the formation of coal. And so coal is primarily plant matter, trees, leafy things, and multicellular life forms that mostly use photosynthesis. Am I correct? Or could it be non-photosynthetic life forms that are also contributing to coal?
It's almost all photosynthetic material. And the difference
Right.
between coal and natural gas and oil is how long and under what pressure those things have been created. So the intense pressure for an extended period of time leads to coal. Not quite so much leads to natural gas.
And so we know that the primary origin of fossil fuels is anaerobic decomposition of buried dead organisms containing organic molecules created by photosynthetic carbon fixation, actually. And so the length of time that it takes them to form is in the millions to tens of millions of years. And this is why we consider them a non-renewable resource. Trees are a renewable resource. If you burn trees, it's renewable in the sense that a tree can grow to a useful width in 15 or 20 years, 25 years. Am I correct, Guy?
Yes.
And non-renewable resources, I mean, the asshole department could reply, well, if it could come back in 20 million years, then it's renewable too. And we always need the asshole department, Guy, because that's where the stupid questions come from. Yeah,
Yes. And it's important to keep in mind a sense of scale, right?
indeed, a sense of time.
Right.
Stuff that happens over 20 years, whether it's something good for the planet or bad, is different from something that happens over 20,000 years or 20 million years. So we see different, here you can see straight from the previous slide where we had lagoons and stagnant water and deltas and mangroves, you've got intense organic activity. It dies, it lives and it dies, and when it dies, it falls on the ground. And what is fascinating that I discovered is that trees and plant matter up to 40 or 50 million years ago or something, there were not microbial microbes that could eat and digest lignins and other complex protein structures or molecules in dead plant matter. And so plant matter, by and large, did not compost and decompose. It was not composting in the sense of today, because today we have bacteria. And so it's the reason we have coal is because we did not have whole classes of bacteria capable of reducing plant matter. And that plant matter just mostly stayed in a dead form, but didn't really decay so much as fall down and get covered by a mixture of water, sediments that then later turn into sedimentary rock and that exert enormous pressure over time, with pressure coming down from gravity, pressure coming up from the increased heat and activity under the earth. And you can see it goes from compressed peat to lignite coal, which is a soft, non-dense coal, to bituminous coal. And not represented here is the king of coal, anthracite coal, the most energy dense coal there is.
That's because it's been it's been under pressure for a longer period of time.
Right.
And that's what you're seeing here, from compressed peat to lignite coal to bituminous coal up through anthracite coal.
Yeah.
That's increased pressure and increased time.
And so, for example, if you've been to Ireland or England, there's parts where you can still dig up peat. In fact, you'll be driving around Ireland and you'll see a family with these beautiful straight shovels, and they're methodically digging up the earth and putting it in wheelbarrows and carts and taking it away. It is their fuel, has been for 2,000 years or more. And you let it dry out a bit and you burn it in a fireplace like a lump of coal. We're going to look here to give more vividness to this. You can see that swampy regions here, I'm in the upper left, cause the earliest stage of something that could ignite is peat. And then more heat and pressure, more time turns it into lignite, then turns it into coal. And we've got further diagrams below, from lignite to what's called a category called subbituminous, to bituminous, to anthracite. On the right, why have I put this here? It tells you that energy density is critical. And this is hard to read, but let's just start at the extreme right. And peat, I think, is off the chart. You need 6,000 BTUs, sorry, 6,000, I'm trying to see, gross calorific value on a moist mineral matter-free basis. So it has low, 6,000 is lower than 16,000. You have lower calorific value as you go to the right. And it's softer, earlier coal. So peat is not even on this chart. I think it lives somewhere to the right. Lignite is at between 6,000 and 7,000 BTUs per pound. So you'd need fewer pounds of lignite than peat to heat your home. And you then have several gradations of coal, subbituminous, C, B. These would matter to you if you owned a coal company or were a geologist for a coal company, or planning the mining of coal. And then it goes up. There's multiple classes at the level of that deliver between 14,000 and 16,000 BTUs, up to anthracite and meta-anthracite. And it even looks like when you get into the super hard, it's actually losing a little bit of energy density. Probably there's some reason for that. It's moving back in a slightly less dense. But once you're above 10,000 BTUs per pound, you're in coal country here. You're making money.
And that coal is going to keep a lot of people warm for a long period of time.
Right. And then we can't even we don't have time to get into what's the different other content in this coal. Sulfur, high sulfur, low sulfur, heavy metals, unfortunately, is all mixed in with this stuff. And depending on where you're getting your coal from, you might have some nasty heavy metals that get airborne. And coal, it has, I think, over 300 different components in it, some of which are just bad for humans to breathe, or bad for any critter to breathe, right?
Right. And mercury is very frequently found with coal as well.
So let's go to the next slide. We are now petroleum and coal geologists. We could be. I mean, this is the same information, the same wonderful discipline of geology that gives us the knowledge of what happened on Earth before, can be used to either figure out what is the climate and how can we care for the climate better, or it can be used, the same person sitting next to you, sitting next to us, Guy, in the school at the Colorado School of Mines.
Or maybe they start out thinking they're going to dig up the coal and be a millionaire. And then as they get into the major, they realize that they want to go down the opposite track.
It's the science of raping the planet for stuff we think we need and want. And it's kind of too bad. So this just, I mean, there are people, I have to also say, Guy, I was astonished to learn that there are people from various different political and conspiratard stripes who, there's a small coven of people who say, well, fossil fuels, it isn't just dead plant matter. There's a natural geological, abiotic. It's mostly on the oil front. We'll get to that. They believe in abiotic oil, but we'll talk about that. But here, in case anyone is doubting, like, do we know for sure? Are we sure that coal is old trees and plant matter compressed over time, not necessarily rotting in the sense of your kitchen scraps rotting very quickly with bacterial decomposition in a compost heap, because that, from what we know, was not happening. The reason we have coal and the other levels is that it is mainly compression over time. And so a coal vein would look like this on the left. And Guy, you can talk about it, and then we'll talk about the tree.
Right. And the coal is essentially always found in this layer. It's limestone and sandstone above, lighter materials, and limestone below. And that limestone has all kinds of life in it. And atop that limestone, you'll find this coal vein, and not just in one place on the planet, not just Virginia, but many places throughout the world.
We will look at that a little later. Is coal? It's always found in a certain period, and I was trying to remember. I mean, there's only 2 or 3 periods on the USGS chart on the standard geological time frame that are held to have produced 80% of the oil and coal, and coal is from one period, and I think it's carboniferous. It's called Carboniferous. It's mainly the Carboniferous period, and I guess that's why the scientists named it Carboniferous.
And you'll see it in the third column, the Paleozoic, and it's a quarter of the way down, the Carboniferous.
Right. I see it. It's right there. If you could put your arrow on it. And so it's interesting to think that when we discover oil and coal, it is at layers that are carboniferous, that have the same kind of plants and that come up in our that relate to all the life forms and the stratigraphy at the Carboniferous stage.
Yes.
I think that Jurassic, I think there's the Triassic Jurassic margin is also another area that I've read about where, and I think one is more coal and one is more oil. But this is the fine point. So this can be Googled. It is not some theory that was cooked up at Dartmouth or Yale in the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. It is been known since the 1700s or 1600s that oil and coal and that these periods relate to the Carboniferous. We are looking at the right. This is, I believe, from Pennsylvania, coal country, one of the several coal countries in these United States. And I believe that this is a photo in a coal seam. And if you look above the miners' heads, there is a hole in the ceiling. And this is a fossilized rock. It's turned into rock. It's a fossil tree stump that nearly fell on the heads, or maybe there's a couple of dead miners under there. But it literally fell out of the ceiling of this coal seam. And so they've mined all the coal underneath it. And this tree had not yet turned into coal. It had turned into a hardened, fossilized, what they call petrified wood. In fact, it's probably a much greater stage than what is called a petrified forest. Can you say more about what you see in this, Guy?
Well, something comes to mind. When I was a kid, maybe 10 or 12 years old, my parents took us to the petrified forest in northwestern Arizona and all the way across to northwestern New Mexico. And I was so disappointed because there was no forest. It was just these scattered remnants of petrified wood, but none of them were as big as my hand. And I thought I was going to see a forest with trees.
Full-size trees, petrified, yes.
Exactly.
All right.
Oh my goodness. So what we're
seeing. So there are, again, I think it's pretty clear that coal comes from old plants that have been laid down and did not decompose. They were pressed and turned into, what happens is the heat, just think of moisture and oil when you cook. You burn off the moisture or cook off the moisture very quickly, leaving the oil. It's very hard to cook off oil. When you make a piece of bacon, most of the smoke that comes off of it, unless your fire is way high, is steam from the moisture leaving the bacon, which then dries out and becomes crispy. I'm a rare bacon person, not rare, but I don't like it super crispy. Some people want their bacon Dagwood Bumstead style, where it's literally almost become coal. But I'm in the mildly cooked bacon school. But what's happening is the plant matter is being desiccated and dried out, and the oils are staying in it, as I understand it. And then greater pressure, greater temperature over time is changing the molecular structure of the oils from the oils are from the lipid layer of cells of animals. Your cells are literally a coating of special lipids that hold the gooey liquid center of your cells together. And if your cells have unhealthy fats in them, you're going to be unhealthy. And that's whether you're a tree or a human.
This is where the differentiation comes between natural gas and oil and coal, is in for how long and at what temperature the material has been exposed. So you get coal under high pressure for an extended period of time. A little less pressure, a little less time, you get oil. A little less pressure, a little less time, you get natural gas.
And we'll see that in the next slide, because I think we're still going to talk about coal for one more slide, because we haven't talked yet how you get coal. So very quickly, how do we get coal when we find a coal seam? Well, there's basically three ways. You either do open pit mining or strip mining if it's close enough to the surface. And you see these giant cranes. This is actually a small crane. They make even much. They make cranes where the bucket is literally the size of this crane, and it's scooping out several dozen tons at a time. Giant wheels, and this is to fuel electric production mostly. Also, furnaces for steel and glass and other things. On the right, mountaintop removal versus traditional shaft mining. So in the extreme right, you see the little yellow veins and a shaft house. If you could be near a coal mine in Pennsylvania that is a shaft mine, and you'd see a few buildings on the surface, but beneath the surface are literally miles of tunnels, only about 5 feet or 4 feet high, where in the old days, where miners go and attack the coal seams with drills and dynamite, every kind of thing. Very dangerous work, not very healthy work. But mountaintop removal, hey, let's just remove the whole mountain over the coal seam and dump it into the next valley and get that coal. Let's just do that. And guess what? They do that all over the South, mainly in this country. Mountaintop removal.
Right.
And it creates massive pollution.
Also in Utah.
And in Utah.
Open pit mining, strip mining, there's a lot of that going on in Utah and a little bit in Colorado, but mostly it's the deep South, and that has had serious social consequences.
But we keep doing it, as I understand it. And so it's either shaft mining. And, guess what? Once you've removed the mountaintop, you can do what's on the left. You can treat it as an open pit and strip mine it. And then you can make a show of covering it over and, reclaiming it and putting a golf course on it or something, or planting trees. But that's rarely done. Shaft mining doesn't actually ruin the surface that much. It's just, more expensive and dangerous. And companies have literally found that they can, in states that will let them, they'll destroy the landscape just to get the coal. We will do anything just to get these fuels.
Yes, they have been enormously expensive. And in many ways, and as a result, they have produced billionaires.
Indeed. All right, let's go to the next one. And we're looking at the formation of oil now. So we've looked at coal. We're now looking at oil. And so where does oil come from? It's from mainly aquatic plants. So the sense I get is coal is from land and from margins, those swamps, those mangroves, those areas where plant matter dies, and falls into gullies and swales and stuff, and then just gets buried over millennia. Um, we think that oil, scientists think or know that oil is mainly found in what were ancient seabeds where aquatic plants, little diatoms and critters, live their life and die, and their shells and bodies fall to the bottom. And a similar process, Guy, from what I understand, they are compressed, they dry out, the oils leave the bodies, and the calcium based carapaces of these critters forms the limestone underneath.
The bottom line here is that the planet, if you want to think of it that way, has been unbelievably kind or not with us in the formation of fossil fuels as a result of a certain series of events that only in retrospect we would have come up with. I don't think anybody is wise enough, is clever enough to have foreseen in advance how coal, oil, and natural gas were going to be formed. And yet here they are powering our way of life at this point. And apparently that will keep going until we reach a point at which it becomes too expensive to maintain this way of life.
We shall see. We have a few bits more. It's really to get that understanding. I don't want to give short shrift, and as you say, all of this is completely uncontroversial science and geology, and is used to go get all of these fossil fuels. And it is. I'm literally not joking that if you are someone who took earth science classes to prepare for a career in forestry or environmental science, you were sitting next to the same people who took those, with knowing that gee, being a petroleum geologist is a really good paying job. Being an academic professor geologist is a really badly paying job, and people treat you, infantilize you, and make you apply for grants that might only be $50,000 every year just to be able to do your work. Whereas petroleum geologists, that's just the meal budget for the travel meals that you will have as you are flown around to get the oil or the coal. So, who can blame someone who needs to raise a family for choosing to become a petroleum geologist? So look, we're gonna cover this because this pertains to how we get this carbon, where this carbon that we're burning came from. It is from the same periods that we study to learn how the planet with life on it changed, how life forms integrate and relate to what's happening on the planet, and how the structure, the chemical structure of the seas and atmosphere in terms of its concentrations of critical gases like oxygen, nitrogen, and trace gases like CO2, methane, and several other trace gases, how these, and trace elements, how these have changed in the planet's history, and the knowledge of how that relates to the climate and to the possibilities for the life on the surface of the planet and the oceans.
Yes, all of these things are interconnected.
And they are. And what we do when we dig up in the space of just round numbers, 2 centuries, 90%, 80 or 90% of the fossil fuels that have ever been burned by humans have been burned in just the last 150 years. There's you can have the asshole department say, well, we have evidence that the ancient Romans knew of oil and used it in certain ways. And the Chinese, ancient Chinese. So we've been using fossil fuels for 3 centuries. The Egyptians knew about coal or whatever. Well, again, to the asshole department, yes, of course. That's how we knew how valuable these were when we became able to harvest these from the earth on a grand industrial scale. So yes, 80, 90%, 95% of all fossil fuels that a human has ever burned intentionally have been burned in the last 150 years, Guy. Will I get kicked out of the
Oh,
geology department for saying that?
oh no, not at all. A vast majority of all the fossil fuels that have been consumed in the history of the planet, that's all been within the last 150 years. And in fact, there's been a ratcheting up throughout that entire period. So there's way more fossil fuels collectively burned between 50 and 100 years ago than there was between 100 and 150. And
Way more.
also more within the last 10 years than in any other 10-year period in human history.
I think that I think somewhere, just as data in the world of computing, you had Eric Schmidt say now over 10 years ago that the amount of data that has been uh, uh, collected in the servers of the world to the point, and when he said this, I think it was around 2004, he said that the amount of data that is in the servers from the history of computing to that point, 2004, he said, we will be adding that amount of data every year now and more. And the same with oil. The amount of oil we burned right up until, say, World War II, we now burn all of that on an annual basis and more. And coal similarly. But we will see, because some people say, oh, coal's going away, etc. Oil's going away. Let's keep going.
Yes, and your description of what has happened increasingly over time with respect to humans is the very definition of hashtag winning, isn't it?
It's growth, must keep growing, must have more, not enough. So I want people to understand oil. So as Guy already said, this is a phrase in the oil industry. There's the oil window. It is so well known at what depth you will find most oil and at what temperature. In that depth, the reigning temperature of the earth at that depth is indicated on the right. And this is plant matter, or I mean organic, we think mostly seafloor matter that escaped oxidation. It's very important. So it did not get oxidized because, again, other than bacteria, oxidation is a way in which organic matter breaks down quicker. If it escapes oxidation, then it slow cooks. Think of your barbecue. You're shutting off to do you know, oil and coal are, you take the principles of a good smoker from the South, who knows about barbecue. It's low and slow, or well, high temperature, but long periods of cooking it down without oxygen. Am I on the right track here?
Absolutely.
And the first stage is biological production of methane. So methane is produced as an early process of this, and then it is converted over millions of years by processes into oil. Some of it remains as gas. Gas is constantly found with oil. Gas can be found on its own. And you have this oil window at a certain place. So if you want to make millions of bucks, you go figure out the oil windows of this planet that have not been tapped yet.
And you're a little late getting started.
You're a little late because most of the easy oil is gone.
Absolutely.
So let's look at oil. Let's look at where we get it. We're going to go quicker here. Drilling for oil. If you can look at the upper left chart, I mean, it just shows the complexity that you've got geologic change in the last 30 million years that has moved oil. I mean, there's all sorts of processes that work to create these pools of oil. They basically need a seal or a trap, a layer, an impermeable layer, a relatively impermeable layer above them and below them, and they end up in these pools. And the blue is usually there's a pocket of natural gas above oil when it is discovered. You can see in the lower chart, lower left, conventional non-associated gas. So you can have a well that just produces gas. If you're looking for oil, that's a huge disappointment. But if you're looking for natural gas, then you can sell that all day long. It's the sustain. What is it? What was it called by Barack Obama? The bridge fuel.
Right.
It's the friendly fuel for sustainability. The deep dark secret is that every solar power or wind power kilowatt, a megawatt that you supply to the grid, you need a standby gas peaking power plant to take over for when the sun goes behind a cloud or when the wind dies down, because our civilization needs a constant power curve. It cannot cope with the fluctuations of the natural fluctuations of wind and solar. So, one of the many deep dark secrets of the so-called renewable revolution is that solar and wind are intermittent, and to supply power to the grid from them, you need one of two things. You need standby gas power plants, fully ready to switch on. So you can't have wind and solar without gas standing by. Now, the asshole department will be here to say, well, what about storage? What about batteries? Okay, yes. Yes, if you are proposing that we mine lithium, various other salts, and lead, and various other ways to create batteries. All of them are materials intensive, and we create the electric companies, or somebody will create banks and banks of these, or people will drive them around, and they will bank all of the intermittent solar and wind so that we can then distribute it to the grid in a smooth power curve, which is absolutely what the grid demands and requires. You're proposing that. Well, if you do the mechanics of that and the footprint of that, then all of a sudden an electric vehicle or electric utility does not seem to be very green. But we'll get to that in a future session. For now, let's just look at the gas and the oil here. In the right-hand chart, you'll see that if it's really easy oil, it might just come popping up from pressure of the gas. But if it's not, increasingly we're having to pump water down upon the oil to force it up. So that's more expensive, obviously environmentally destructive. In the early days of the oil age, the oil just popped out of the ground. You didn't have to inject water. You didn't have to use dynamite. It was filthy enough to be a very polluting industry right on the surface, never mind what we did when we burned it inefficiently. You weren't actually having to pump water in most cases. The oil was under pressure. Today, however, let's go to the next chart. The next chart is about oil sands. So another formation of oil is when it's near or on the surface, as it is in much of Alberta, where in the oil regions of Alberta, much of it is oil sands or tar sands. And how has that happened? Again, it's geologic layers that have simply pushed what was perhaps an underground oil field has become exposed or is closer to the surface. This was not exploitable until about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. We would never have tried to exploit this. Why are we going to the lengths of exploiting this now? It's much more expensive. Could it be that we're running out of the other stuff?
Could very well be.
Let's keep going. Could very well be, for 100 years, 200 years, they've known about oil sands and how much oil they contain. Hasn't been anything they would pay attention to till the last 25 years. Let's, though, look at further unconventional oil, so-called tight oil, or fracking, or what are called the shale plays. It's such an innocuous phrase, the shale plays. Guy, are you investing in any of the shale plays?
Where I live in Vermont, it's all shale. So
really?
Yes. So it makes it almost impossible to dig a post hole, because you go down about an inch, sometimes 2 inches, you're out of soil, you're right into the shale, and it's all fractured. It's just a mess. We're buying a house here, so I guess I'm investing in shale plays.
Indeed. And we're going to get to this, but as I understand it with shale, and we'll look at the map in a minute, it has surprised a lot of people. You might be in rural Illinois, and your mother and grandfather would tell you that this has never been oil country, never had oil wells here. But all of a sudden, if you own a farm, you might well find a certified letter arriving saying that the owner of the mineral rights under your farm is now going to be exploiting those mineral rights. And those mineral rights have been owned for 100 years by some corporation you never even heard of. You had no idea when your great-grandfather bought the farm that the mineral rights had been sold to some consortium. And they're going to come on your land now, and they'll create at least a 1 or 2 acre plot where they're going to take a lot of equipment and be drilling down under your land. And that's called fracking. And they're going to be doing relatively horrendous things down there. Let's look. This is a complex diagram, but you can see they drill down in a casing, and then they drill horizontally, and they introduce various chemicals, superheated water, and they use explosives to create fractures to free up oil or gas in these regions. And by golly, when they don't just put water down there, they put water with lots of other components in it, and that water is going to possibly enter the aquifers that we depend on for drinking water. This is what we're doing. This is fracking. And this is what, even under Obama, it was declared, it was good fuel. And by the middle of his second term, America was producing so much oil and gas from unconventional plays that The Economist famously in the year 2014, go check it out, puts a cover called Saudi America. We became the largest oil and gas producing nation once again, eclipsing Saudi Arabia.
We're number one.
We're number one. And so you could see these fracking operations. Let's go one more slide here.
And I want to point out before we go to the next slide that a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know until I was in graduate school, that the person who owns the surface of the land, say somebody who is farming, does not own the subsurface portion of the land. So you think you're mowing your lawn, you're actually mowing your lawn, and you're also having an impact and realizing the impacts from what goes on well below ground. I didn't discover this until I was in Texas going to graduate school, when I discovered that all those oil and gas wells were on people's private property, and there's nothing the people with the private property could do about it because they didn't own what was underneath the surface.
Indeed. At most, they're required to provide an easement to get to the oil derrick, and in some cases, the oil company does pay them rent on a per acre basis for the land, the surface land they're using, but it's nothing. It's peanuts, and it can ruin the land, and it certainly doesn't look very good. And they're not getting the oil unless they're a family that had the foresight to buy the mineral rights or to research the mineral rights in 1910 when they bought the land. They're not getting a piece of that.
Right. And of course, this is a matter of national security now, fossil fuels. So the poor schmuck who owns the surface is in real trouble.
Yeah. And so here's a map. I mean, if those of you who are watching this, you might want to look at these areas. These are not, except from the exception of Pennsylvania and Texas, a lot of this is not traditional oil country. Look at, you've got Illinois, Indiana, you've got parts of the deep south, you've got the whole of a lot of New England, as you've said, is shale country now, Marcellus, shale, and Devonian. You'll have some of these shale basins are named for the very geological strata that they are. Shale gas basins, stacked plays. It sounds so enjoyable that it's called play.
Oh, yes.
But absolutely, there are ranchers in Denver, in the in Colorado area, and elsewhere who have suddenly uh, watched as equipment arrives, and where they thought they're going to range their cattle, they now are told there's going to be several different fracking operations, and they quickly call their land surveyor and their lawyer, and they say, well, you know, the mineral rights here have been owned by Chevron, a company that sold itself to Chevron in the 1960s. You didn't know that when your great grandfather bought this land and began ranching it, or when you leased a lot of it's leased land. You leased it from someone else, but the mineral rights are owned by some other party. So you know you'll just have to get out of their way. They get to exploit. They get to build whatever surface infrastructure they need to exploit the mineral rights. The whole country is told, "Suck it up, Buttercup. We need this oil. We need this gas. The oil companies and the gas companies need this." And I have to say that it's hard to disagree, Guy, because what do we do to politicians, whether it's Joe Biden or the other name that I won't say, or any politician, right or left, Democrat or Republican, if there is a sudden and persistent price hike in oil and gas, or a shortage, or its availability becomes difficult because of uh, some war in some other part of the planet, what do we demand? Do we tend to say, oh, oil and gas are basically a strategic weakness. Our addiction to them is a form of, this is a strategic weakness that our country is so dependent on this. We better get off of this stuff as soon as possible. I don't think we do that. We hammer those politicians. What are you doing to help the oil and gas companies lower the price of oil? That's what they did to Biden, and that's what they did to the UK government, and both the US and the UK government in the last year and a half have authorized some of the largest new oil and gas exploration in history. And that's while giving lip service to the climate.
This set of living arrangements requires inexpensive oil, pure and simple, and we've known this for generations.
And if we're going to achieve our vaunted goals in deploying solar and wind, we're going to need continued cheap available oil and gas on a
Yes,
grand scale.
not to mention rare earth minerals, which are called rare earth for a reason.
And to do all the mining, is it going to be purely electrical giant trucks and digging equipment? I think so. We're going to convert all that giant digging machine to electric, using Tesla's batteries, using Elon Musk's batteries, and it'll all be electric. Not. It's going to
Yeah.
be diesel. It's going to be, people think the most critical fuel is gasoline. The most critical fuel is diesel. And that's what it's going to be, folks. Next slide. It's not just the US, it's Canada. Canada has, I think, maybe 40 million people now, a little more than the state of California. Canada is the size, almost greater than the size of the continental US. Let's go to the next one. And Canada, our dear friends up north, is an oil state. I mean, you just have to look at this. This is crude oil, natural gas, oil sands, refineries, coal mines, pipelines, crude oil pipelines. Our dear friends, the Canadians, we are so lucky to have them to the north, because between them and us, we are two of the largest oil states on the planet. Largest amounts of coal. The coal reserves of the US and Canada, I read, are the largest in the world. And more and more of it is going to stay in the ground because we're against coal now. But we're going to see who's really using coal right now. So there's lots of good news. So Guy, we've covered a lot today, and this is really, again, a part one of what's going to be a two-part thing, because what we've done is we've looked at fossil fuels from the same, if you will, geological scientific basis as we did look at previous evidence for paleoclimate. It is the paleoclimate that gave us oil and gas and coal, and the same knowledge the same discipline, geology, and different departments within geology are what have allowed modern society to go after oil and gas that we could never have gone after even just before World War II. The techniques of getting the oil, gas, and coal that we are getting today, we could not have done just before World War II. We're using high tech, and we're doing kooky and crazy things to get the remaining hydrocarbon molecules, and get them we must. What are your thoughts as we bring this episode to a close before we start our next one?
If we're going to maintain this set of living arrangements, and apparently almost everybody wants to do that, then we have to have oil. We have to have oil. We have to have natural gas. We have to have coal. We absolutely depend upon these hydrocarbons for the maintenance of this set of living arrangements. And I don't know very many people who would rather grow all of their own food. I don't know very many people who want to give up their vehicles and walk to the grocery store that's 12 miles away. So, we can complain all we want about the politicians who have gotten us into this situation, but it's not them. They are responding to the masses. The masses want fossil energy. That's all there is to it because we grew up on it. We've come to depend upon it. It's difficult to imagine life without it. I lived off grid for more than a decade, and it's a completely different way of living than the way I'm living now, the way that most people listening are living now.
Indeed. And the fate of politicians who, with best of intentions, have in our history tried to take very significant measures for conservation, for climate. I think his name was Jimmy Carter. I think there were many other reasons why his presidency only lasted one term, but that was certainly one of them. He was not popular. The oil crisis and the politics of Middle Eastern oil are a large part of what brought an end to his presidency. And any president, if you look out at the world right now, any president or premier or leader who is not doing what is needed to bring oil, gas, and coal and other fuels as cheaply and quickly and reliably as possible their population, you don't bet on their longevity in politics. Well, look, I think we'll close on that note, and we will, in our next episode, we'll be following on from a lot of this information to see where we are now with fossil fuels and with energy.
Sounds good.